Funding for this film has been generously provided by the Annenberg Foundation Trust at Sunnylands. Citizenship is every person's highest calling.
I'm Dan Harris in Signers Hall at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. We hardly think of it this way today, but to these men, this was an experiment, starting a new type of government for a new country they were going to call the United States of America. Not only was there no guarantee that it would work, but history pretty much told them it wouldn't. In their day, nations were run by rulers, not rules. Kings and emperors told everyone else what to do. A government run by the people themselves, that was an old idea, but it had never quite worked. People fight with each other. It's human nature. People are messy. They have their own interests, and they disagree. All rulers knew that it took armies to keep the people under control. But these men believed it took a constitution, that they could create institutions that would let conflict occur, deal with it, and that people would accept the outcome. That's what they believed. And in the spring of 1787, it was time to deliver. But they weren't sure that they could. The Constitution was written in a time of crisis. They knew that if they failed at that moment, their country would fail. They responded by starting a nation in one room with just a handful of ideas and a small group of men.
I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Films like this really kind of miss the point.
Protect and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Oh boy, they play right into the myth.
A lot of the image that we have of the Founding Fathers comes in part from 19th century historians who actually wrote that God handed down the Constitution.
Thomas Jefferson was a founding father. He was the one who wrote the Declaration of Independence. He called the men who wrote the Constitution demigods. So what did that make him?
They're the closest thing we have to the Greek gods or royalty, and so they've been transformed into larger-than-life figures.
For 200 years, we've written books about them, we've cast them in bronze, carved them from marble.
Dr. Benjamin Franklin.
We've made awful educational films about them.
And you, James Madison. Our children's children will remember you.
And the average school child in America is taught to speak of these men in kind of hushed whispers. They were all heroic figures who were going to be whisked directly up to heaven.
In fact, everyday visitors to the nation's capital can walk into the heart of the rotunda, look up to the ceiling of the dome, and see a painting called The Apotheosis of Washington. In other words, George Washington becoming a god. These were real men who faced real challenges. They knew they weren't gods. Gods have special powers that men don't. And they didn't trust any man who wanted the power of a god or, say, a king. Many of them would blush or be embarrassed by the way we look up to them now. Well, some of them would anyway.
We should admire them, not because they're superhuman, not because they're supermen, but because they're ordinary people.
And that's what makes the real story so much more remarkable than the myth. Okay, for the record, Ben Franklin thought the Constitution would last, about 10 years. Franklin and some of these men were actually brilliant, but they really didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Point was, they were trying to get out of a long, seemingly endless cycle of conflict. Let's go back for a minute. I'll make this quick. 150 years before the Constitution, we were separate colonies of Britain. We were ruled as the king saw fit. He could throw us in jail, make us pay unfair taxes, take our land. His word was the last word. That caused some conflict. In 1776, Thomas Jefferson and 55 other men risked their lives by signing the Declaration of Independence, telling Britain and the world that we weren't going to obey the king anymore. We fought a war to win our independence and started our own government in 1781, the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation turned out to be a recipe for more conflict.
Yeah, the first Constitution of the United States was a failure.
The Articles of Confederation really did not bind the new states together into one nation.
The Articles of Confederation were actually called a League of Friendship. What kind of a nation calls itself a League of Friendship?
Remember that the colonists were revolting against England. They were revolting against a monarchy, and they were revolting against a parliament that had total power. What they wanted to do was to prevent anybody or any group of people, any institution in this country from having that kind of power over their lives.
You had groups of people who had existed for a fairly long time and identified themselves as Virginians or as people from Maryland or people from Massachusetts.
North Carolina, where the wonders never cease.
Delaware, it's good being first.
They want what later would be called states' rights, state sovereignty.
The states saw themselves as essentially sovereign nations that had kind of agreed to kind of maybe work together, maybe kind of, sort of.
And things fall apart so quickly that it's really kind of dazzling.
One of the biggest, if not the biggest, problems was that there was no power of taxation.
Under the Articles of Confederation, the national government was flat broke. It couldn't afford to protect ships on the Atlantic from pirates, and it couldn't protect citizens on the western borders either. Each state printed its own money.
Even more dramatically, New York State, which has the great port of New York City, is charging Connecticut and New Jersey an arm and a leg for everything that comes into their port. And so Connecticut and New Jersey are meeting to plan a united military attack on New York.
But the breaking point for the Articles of Confederation came when veterans of the Revolutionary War, mostly farmers, staged a revolt against the state of Massachusetts, and in this scene, against the basic principles of acting.
We're here to get justice. That's right. Captain Daniel Shays, you are in contempt of court. I will see you jailed for this. Oh, no. You're not going to judge me or any other man in this county. You're going to join this court, or we'll clear you out. Now,
Shays' Rebellion sends fear through every state. What it represents is a breakdown of law and order. And all their rhetoric is the rhetoric of the revolution. This is a tyrannical government. This is a government that's not looking out for the interests of the people. When Washington hears about Shays' Rebellion, I think for him this is the low point of the whole Confederation period.
General Washington, another such outbreak as this Massachusetts affair and we shall have anarchy.
He said, it's a triumph for our enemies that we are incapable of governing ourselves.
We can't even win the loyalty of our own citizens. Something has to be done.
But what? Everyone knew this government needed to be fixed, but the big question was, how?